Hi, this is F. Paul Driscoll with another episode of Opera News Sightlines, and my guest today is Stephen Pickover, the renowned stage director. Stephen, welcome.
Thank you so much, F. Paul. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. So we had met, I think, probably for the first time on opening night of Boris.
Yes.
This season, which is one of several shows you're working on.
Correct.
As a stage director. Now, can you tell me what is involved in that? Because Boris was originally staged by Stephen Wadsworth when the production was new. It was revived this year in a shortened version. It's the original version as opposed to the expanded one that was done when the production was new. So what does your work involve on a show like that?
Well, Stephen was back for this revival, given the fact that it was basically almost like a new production, since it was, cut severely, the 1869 version as opposed to the 1872 version. Mm-hmm. So I basically assisted Stephen in helping to figure out how to do this and putting it together.
So in a normal revival, if there is such a thing as a normal revival, right, when you are working on putting something out and the original director is not there,
yes,
what does your job description entail?
Basically, putting the production back together as well as can be accomplished given a shorter amount of time, and also taking into account the new cast.
Right.
So, for example, let's say a production was done with someone who couldn't kneel, mm-hmm, physically, and so that got written into the blocking that there was no kneeling. However, I know that the original director would have loved to have this, mm-hmm, person kneel, but couldn't. Mm-hmm. So if I do a revival and I get somebody who can kneel, I have an idea of what was originally intended, and I try to accomplish that with the cast that I have.
What are you working on now?
I just finished working on Eurydice, mm-hmm, which was a wonderful. Having a composer and librettist in the rehearsal room, yeah, is beyond luxurious. Mm-hmm. Certainly at the Met. So that was that's been a lot of fun.
Did you work on it in Los Angeles?
No.
Just here? Just here. Were there very many changes made in between the Los Angeles premiere and the Met premiere this year?
Not many, no. I mean, there were small ones and certainly small orchestration things that Matt did, and but production-wise, most things remain the same.
I have one more question about revivals, and then I want to get on to your directing career on your own. But on revivals, let's say, you have a director like Franco Zeffirelli, who's very unlikely to come to rehearsals anymore, yes, except in spirit. So how does the company, the Met, how do you handle maintaining something like that? Let's say the Bohème or the Turandot or whatever.
Well, I can talk about, I'm about to do Ariadne. So,
okay.
So that's a perfect example. We handle it by, it hasn't been done in about 11 years. Mm-hmm. So I'm getting a few more days of rehearsal time. I know I have a book that shows me what was done before. I have a final dress tape of previous reincarnations of the opera. Mm-hmm. And I also have a completely different cast who will be able to do more or less than what was done before. And I try to create, every time every time we do a revival, we try to create it as if it was new.
Yeah.
With the sense of new chemistry, new singers. The prop is the same, but and their interactions are similar, but each one works in a different way. And so we try to make it fresh every time.
And the Ariadne production is originally Elijah Mashinsky?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you work on the original with him?
No, I worked on it a few years later.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about your journey as a director. How did you get into this business? Where did you start?
That's funny. I was a biology and theater major at the University of Michigan.
Uh-huh.
So I have a double degree in biology and theater, and I was working in a laboratory and was considering going on for my PhD. And at the time, I thought, I don't want to be one of those old 30-year-olds who say, oh, I could have done this. So I said, let me go into theater and see what happens. Of course, nobody was pleased with that decision. But I plowed forward, and I ended up going to Columbia University graduate school for my MFA in theater directing.
Uh-huh.
But I was their music person. I played the violin. I had, done musicals and stuff. So I was the person who knew about music. And so anytime any kind of musical thing came up, for example, varsity shows, which Columbia used to do all male during Rodgers and Hart when they were there in the 20s, I actually did my thesis on Rodgers and Hart and their early music that we found in a box in the attic at Columbia. So that was at Columbia, and we had to do a professional internship. Most people did plays on Broadway because they had an arrangement with the Schuberts. But at that time, this was in the early 80s, believe it or not, there were no new musicals. So I said, well, maybe I could do an opera. And they said, well, we don't have any relationship with an opera company. Mm-hmm. So I went to New York City Opera and I said, hi, I'm a graduate student at Columbia. Can I, be a directing intern? And they said, no, we don't do that. So then I said, okay. And then I went to the Met and said, can I be a directing intern? And they said, well, we don't do that, but let's talk. And basically it took a year to arrange. And then I was the first directing intern at the Met.
And what did that entail? I mean, when you say an intern, had you finished your degree? Was this something that you were being...
I had not finished my degree. I was still a graduate student. I was not paid. Mm-hmm. At the very beginning, basically, since they had never done it before, they said, if anyone complains about you, if you do anything wrong, you're out. So the first day I sat in the corner, very quietly. And then in the middle of the first rehearsal, one of the singers wanted her shoes. And they looked at me and said, go get her shoes. Now, I'd never been in the building before. And for those of you who don't know the Met, it's a labyrinth of stairways, and I still get lost.
Yeah.
So I had to figure out how to get her shoes, which I did in about an hour. And so I did. I got the shoes. I brought them back, and that was the beginning.
So, what were some of the shows that you worked on when you were starting there? Do you remember?
Well, yes, that show actually was very bizarre because I knew something about opera, but I wasn't a huge, aficionado. I was mostly with musicals. Mm-hmm. I actually sang in Michigan Opera in the chorus, so I had familiarity, but it wasn't my first strength. And the first opera they put me on was Strauss's Arabella. So number one, who knew Arabella?
Yeah.
I didn't speak German. It was with Leinsdorf. It was a new production with Leinsdorf conducting, Otto Schenk, Kiri Takanawa, and Kathy Battle.
Yes.
So that was the first day. And it was kind of crazy. There was one moment where they needed a surly, arrogant, Viennese waiter. The waiter didn't say much, but he dropped a calling card on the table. So they asked me to do it. So I did. I sort of learned that at the end of the line, drop the card, which is what I did. But I didn't do it with enough arrogance and panache that they were all expecting. And I remember I did it 3 times and it was wrong every time. So finally Leinsdorf got up and said, I'll do it.
Oh, no.
Yes. So there was Eric Leinsdorf being a surly Viennese waiter.
How did he do?
He was fabulous. I learned how to do it from him.
So how long did it take before you graduated out of the intern program and then moved forward to being a stage director?
I worked on several shows that semester, basically. And then remember, I wasn't getting paid.
Yeah.
And I did some work. So I think they just felt sorry for me and hired me the following year for a few weeks when Arabella came back.
Yeah.
In a revival. So then they hired me for, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks. And that's it. I've been hired ever since.
So for you, I mean, you say you weren't an opera person, but you're in a rehearsal room with Kiri Takanawa and Kathleen Battle and Eric Leinsdorf, which are, I mean, by anyone's judgment or standards, those are legends. I mean, were you all overawed, or it was just business as usual?
Well, no, it wasn't business as usual. I mean, I was a kid. I certainly was in awe, but it was more, I better not say anything, because they really drilled it into me that if somebody complained or if, I did something and someone gave me a dirty look, they were going to send me away. So I was until I actually started doing some things, and people smiled at me instead of glared at me. It was a little touch and go. But then after that, I just, it was difficult because I didn't speak German at the time.
Sure.
So, it was all sort of new, but I'm from New York. So, my first opera at the Met was in 7th grade. We studied Lucia and I went as a student. We had a student field trip.
Yeah.
And saw Alfredo Kraus and Joan Sutherland. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't intimidated. And there was so much to learn. And, Otto Schenk was amazing. And the ones who were actually assisting him were amazing and helped me sort of, I learned all about this paperwork and all about, it was an amazing learning experience.
Do you have a favorite opera of all the operas that you've worked on, or a favorite production memory?
I actually really enjoyed the Macropolis case, the Janacek opera. I revived it a few times, and I did work on that with Elijah initially.
Yeah.
And I just, I really enjoy that opera.
So you did it, it's been done at the Met in English, but also in Czech, yes?
In Czech, yes. We did it in Czech. And I also did it down in Houston in Czech.
Uh-huh. Do you, on something like that as a director, how do you process that? Because certainly at the Met, it was done for Miss Norman in English, in
Right.
an English translation.
Yes.
But do you think that there is a validity to the argument that it should always be done in the original language, or?
Well, there's a validity to that only because the music is written to the language.
Yeah.
So and each language has its own lilt.
Yeah.
And musicality. So I just find, I mean, on one hand, yes, then everybody can understand it, but you do get a lot more of what the composer and librettist, their intent, when you do it in the original language. And so for me, I don't speak Czech, but I certainly studied it before I did it. And I had we had someone who had a literal translation of every single word as it would be in Czech. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't a singing translation. It was a literal translation. So, and after, studying it for a while, you do feel more secure once you know what everybody's saying.
Of course. So on your own work, away from the Met, what is your passion? What kind of projects do you like working on as a director?
I like working on new work. And I did a world premiere of an opera called Opera at Sambajo, by the late composer Patrick Byers. I've done odd, things that weren't seen in New York. It was with a small company in New York called Riverside Opera, and we did things like, Tsandonai's Giulietta Romeo. It's something that's never done, but it was interesting to do, and so we had a lot of people came. Things like that. I actually wrote an opera based on the Count of Monte Cristo, which is, and at Merkin we're having they're doing a concert of new composers, and the second half of it is excerpts from the the opera. Yeah.
Has it ever been done anywhere else, or this is?
No, it hasn't been done yet. It's like in workshop form.
And when is the performance? And is the public invited?
Yes, it's Merkin Concert Hall, May 16th.
Okay.
At 7:30.
And how much of the novel are you putting on the stage?
Well, yeah, I know that took about a year and a half to come up with an appropriate scenario. That's one of the reasons why I chose to do that. A friend of mine who's a composer approached me, and I really wasn't really interested. And then I said, well, there hasn't been a musical adaptation, or I should say maybe a successful musical adaptation of The Count of Monte Cristo. There have been films, there was play, but there haven't been musical adaptations. So I said, that's at least challenging, and I wonder why. Well, as soon as I started working on it, I was like, no wonder no one's done it. It's impossible. It's the first 100 pages is he's framed. Yeah. Edmond Dante's framed, and then the next 800 pages are the most intricate revenge plots. So it took us a while to come up with a scenario that would work for the opera, but we did, and obviously we don't do every one of them. And we chose there's 75 characters, so we don't have 75 characters. So now it's ready.
I remember reading that when I was, I guess, about 12 maybe, and all the details that I didn't understand, like the hollowed out emerald with the drugs inside.
With the drugs inside, yeah.
Not talking what that was for.
Right.
But
I know it gets so intricate, and it's all, he talks to someone who then knows someone else who then knows the person he's getting revenge on, and it's so complicated. So obviously we had to simplify a lot, but once we finally did, it was a lot of fun to work on.
So other than your own new work, when as a stage director, you're working on a new piece with a composer, with a libretto,
Yes.
um, how soon do you like to get involved? Do you like someone to hand you a score and a libretto, or do you like being in at the beginning of the creation process, or how does that work best for you?
Well, usually there's already something there. There, I mean, if they haven't written it yet, it's very difficult. But assuming there is something on the page, and they have a story, and they have you know some kind of organization and some kind of musical concept, the earlier the better is usually. It's great to get involved when the composer and librettist don't feel it's completely finished.
Right.
That's really what, that's the sort of borderline, so that you can come in and, play devil's advocate and, talk about dramaturgical things and sort of help facilitate, moving things along, and when everybody's feeling fresh, as opposed to it's finished.
Yeah.
So.
What about operas you haven't done? Is there anything on your wish list that you're dying to direct?
Yeah, I'd love to do a Ring. I've certainly worked on it many times.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to do my own. I'm fond of, somehow once I started that Strauss at the beginning, I sort of fell into the Wagner, Strauss, heavy, late Verdi, heavy, non-comic pieces. So, it would be nice to do a comedy, and it would be, other than Meistersinger,
Yeah.
or Siegfried. And I also haven't done a lot of Mozart. So it would be really nice to do something like Don Giovanni.
And the Mozart, you didn't do that much of just because it happened that way, or?
It just happened. Yes, it just happened that way. I mean, Mozart is fairly produced. So the companies that I was with didn't do them. So, and at the Met, I was on the heavier side. So those were not the assignments that I was given. So it just sort of worked out that way.
In your estimation, has, trying to think of a tactful way of putting this, there's a lot that's said about the old days of Park and Bark. And my memory of when I started going to the opera was not so much Park and Bark. I thought it was pretty exciting, but maybe it was my lack of experience. But do you think that there's been a shift in values in terms of the way opera is presented? Is the acting that much better now?
I think you certainly in the past had wonderful actors.
Yeah.
And there was the Park and Bark, but there was also, I think also the Park and Bark is dependent on how thrilling the voice is.
Right.
If it's Park and Bark, but they're, I relate it to, an athletic event, I mean, the other night, Sandra Radvanovsky, who's anything but Park and Bark. I mean, she's a brilliant actress, got stopped the show with a 3 to 4 minute ovation.
Yeah.
So it's just like being, at a game, Yeah. So I think there's that element to it that people who don't go to opera don't understand. It isn't just sit quietly and contemplate the music. It can be a real experience with what's going on stage.
Right.
That said, I do think now you can't do a production that doesn't have some kind of movement or stuff going on, a sort of a stronger concept, not necessarily an original This is what, the composer said it in the 17th century, and that's where we are. I think now more is required to get across to the audience. But when you have thrilling singing, it's thrilling.
But I thought I was at the first performance of the Tosca, and I thought it was everything. I mean, she was thrilling acting, thrilling singing.
Exactly.
She was so committed physically, and I think
the whole package. Yeah. Right.
And that is always rare, but I think that there's nothing more exciting than when all that comes together. Exactly.
And she could, in that case, she could have been in a box. Know. It's nice to have a glorious set and glorious costumes. But with what she presents on stage, she could have been in a slip, and everyone would have still dropped dead.
And the other thing about that, which I thought was really interesting from where I was sitting in the orchestra, is seeing how many people were not looking at the titles when she was singing. And it reminded me of the titles are wonderful, and certainly they belong there, but when you didn't have that, performers knew to sing with a certain level of urgency and informed what they sang with the real drama. And she certainly did that. There was no doubt in anyone's mind as to what was going on moment to moment.
Exactly. And you could follow it with titles or without.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and that's, that's an amazing technical skill.
Yeah.
That not everybody has, but I would say it's balanced. It's really, it's different than it was, but thrilling singing is thrilling. Singing and acting is what it is, and people will jump out of their seats no matter what.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Joan Sutherland, and certainly that was thrilling singing in the right repertoire, but thinking about
not terribly. You're right. The acting was not necessarily the greatest.
I think comparing people like Sandra or Pat Rissette or Anna Netrebko in Trovatore to Dame Joan, the level of agitation at Leonore's situation was
right. Exactly. I do remember going to that performance in 7th grade and being bored to tears.
I had seen her with Pavarotti in Daughter of the Regiment, and I thought it was thrilling because I'd never heard, it wasn't my first opera, but and I was at that point probably about 18, I guess. But just the physical sensation of hearing
those notes.
Voices,
right?
And it felt like they were coming into my head, and the only other voice at that time in my life that was like that was Birgit Nilsson, because it was like she reached out and grabbed your ears.
Exactly. I had that experience with when Leontine Price did the final Aida. I was snuck in during the final dress, and no one was allowed in the auditorium. And it was like having velvet overtones wrap around you and it was one of the most amazing experiences I ever had.
Yeah.
The sound was, and it was huge. It was tremendous.
Yeah.
Yes. So those moments are precious.
Well, thank you for sharing them with us, and that's all we have time for. But Stephen, this was great, and I wish you continued success in everything.
Thank you, F. Paul. It was great to be here. Thank you so much.
This is F. Paul Driscoll for Sightlines. My guest today, Stephen Pickover, stage director extraordinaire. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Thank you.